If you woke up one morning and realized your husband wasn't who you thought he was, would you know what to do? The day I discovered my husband had changed his name, without ever telling me, felt as if I'd been living in someone else's life all along. That morning, the world I thought I understood crumbled around me. It started with a letter I didn't recognize. A strange financial notice filled with words that shivered through my chest like cold glass. Joint surety, liability, debt. Suddenly, my marriage, my whole life, felt like an elaborate play, staged for an audience I'd never met. Now, at 63, I've had decades to build the fragile structure people called a good family. I married Youngsu before I turned 30, chasing what I believed was my duty to grow, to be the perfect daughter-in-law, balancing tradition and care. Back then, my days were shaped by polite smiles, neat clothes, and careful attention to my husband's moods. I tried to be the glue between my own family and my in-laws. Even while raising 2 children and keeping a modest snack shop afloat, I told myself we were the picture of a proper couple. Steady, hardworking, presentable. A set of side dishes arranged just so on the dinner table. The neighbors nodded approvingly, and for years I thought that meant we were happy. But underneath, little cracks began to show, at first nearly invisible, like a hairline fracture in porcelain. On my side of the family, money worries always trailed after us like a bad smell. My older brother, Byung-soo, had a knack for big schemes and bigger failures, forever backed by my younger sister, Mi-jung, who loyally stood by his side. I was always squeezed in the middle, juggling my mother's hospital bills, Byung-soo's endless financial troubles, and the needs of my own family. I tried to stretch myself wider, but no matter how I tried, the cracks deepened. Meanwhile, inside our home, silence settled like a heavy blanket. Youngsu spoke less and less, until the only words left between us were practical, matters of courtesy, necessity, show. At some point, we drifted each into our separate bedrooms, only coming close for the annual family photographs, touching shoulders for a flash of the camera. People still called us an upstanding couple, but to my ears, the praise sounded more like a disguised warning. I'd look in the mirror, and my own face felt unfinished, as if everyone else had put on makeup, and I had missed my cue. One day, a letter appeared in our mailbox, a gray envelope stamped with urgent red ink from a personal finance company I'd never heard of. I opened it with trembling hands and found the word that changed everything. Surety. My brother's name stood as guarantor, but the debtor's name was unfamiliar. I willed myself to believe it had nothing to do with us. Yet inside, I knew the smooth surface of my life had become fatally unstable. My brother's face was growing grayer by the week. My mother's medical expenses climbed even as my shop earnings fell. Each day, my heart swung wildly between scraping together a living, rushing medicine to mother, checking if my brother had enough to eat, and lying awake at night, tracing the growing fissures in our ceiling and in my heart. Then came the day I forced myself to look at our accounts, to tally up the numbers with the coldness of a stranger. I always thought the monthly withdrawals from my bank account ended up in my husband's, part of the routine we'd set years ago. But that day, I saw for the first time, the money flowed elsewhere, to a bank account slyly added by my husband himself. Canceling the transfer required his signature. My hands shook. I asked myself endlessly, what was he doing with that money? Terror and dull shock mingled as I finally decided to step off the stage and take control of my own story. I went to the local district office with a sense of dread, clutching my identification and the wrinkled notice. People say that if you come looking for solutions, your face looks different than if you merely want answers. I couldn't tell you which face I wore. I was only desperate for truth. All I wanted was to know, why was my address tied to this loan, and did Young-soo have anything to do with it? The clerk handed me a sheaf of paperwork. In a box labeled "Previous Name," I saw it, a name I recognized only from the corners of Young-soo's old-school albums and from a tattered family registry in his parents' wardrobe all those years ago. My husband had quietly, officially changed his name. The information settled into my bones, a heaviness I could neither avoid nor explain. Why was his old name now tangled up in my brother's debt? That night, I sat in darkness, haunted by memories. My mother, my siblings, my youthful hopes. People change their names to shake off old burdens. I've always believed that. But I realized then that a new name doesn't change the direction of old debts. I thought of my brother, wishing he would stop pulling my heart toward disaster, but knowing I couldn't abandon him. I cooked him an emotional stew from leftovers, remembering how, after a boiling crisis, even old ingredients can become edible again. Yet at home, my heart kept circling the same dread. Was everything I'd built, a marriage, a family, a reputation, just a painted glass window, ready to shatter at a touch? From that point, the conflict only deepened. Demands for debt repayment arrived with alarming regularity. Each time, my brother's name appeared as the co-signer, the amount owed swelling bigger and bolder on every notice. Word circled through the neighborhood, whispers of my family being ruined by my brother's irresponsibility. I kept working in the shop, forcing myself not to flinch at the pitying stares. Young-soo played his part as the thoughtful husband who smoothed my coat before we went out, but back home, he vanished into silent shadows. It occurred to me then, did anyone truly know what lay behind our neat appearances? The sharp exhaustion, the lies, the secrets that eroded us like acid? That autumn, my mother's illness took a turn. Hospital trips became routine, my feet pacing between home, hospital, shop, and my brother's dark apartment. Sometimes, my sister and I would quietly message each other, neither really knowing how to tie these loose ends before everything snapped. I learned, painfully, that money stretches like a rubber band between people until it finally snaps with a twang you can't ignore. Every day, with every anxious errand, I felt that snap coming closer. Then one long evening, I found an envelope at my own front door. Just another collection notice, except this time the names inside were intimately, unsettlingly familiar. Co-signer, my brother. Debtor. Not a stranger, but someone with my husband's birth date and his old, discarded name. A chill ran from my heart to my toes. This was the clue I'd been waiting for, the decisive moment. The debt was my husband's from before he changed his name, before he reinvented himself as the considerate man everyone thought I'd married. Until that moment, I'd blamed my brother for pulling me into his mess while shielding Young-soo and myself behind dignified detachment. Now, with those papers in my hands, I saw the twin signatures, the same poor penmanship I remembered from our newlywed days, on every contract. My world split in two. On one side, all my old misunderstandings and faithful routines. On the other, Young-soo's hidden history and secret debts that had been slowly bleeding my family for years. Suddenly, everything about my marriage changed. Had I spent 3 decades married to a man whose real life I never touched? Was our dignified partnership just a stage set to cloak the real, rusted machinery beneath? For the first time, I clearly saw the glass separating us. It was not simply distance. It was a wall built from fear, shame, and the desire to protect reputations at any cost. I started to dig, piecing together the timeline. With every certificate, every old record, it became clear that the period my husband changed his name overlapped almost exactly with when my brother had signed as guarantor. Every new detail felt sharper. Debts, I realized, flow along the veins of a family like blood. When one tries to stem the tide by changing a name, someone else has to take up the pressure. My brother became the reluctant vein, carrying the weight my husband tried to shed. I fought against the realization that I, through inaction, had tightened the noose around my own kin. The pressure grew unbearable. In my husband's old wallet, I found the last traces: ancient business cards and a faded graduation photo bearing the wrong surname. It struck me that you only need to disturb the settled dust of the past a little for old truths to come flying out. My husband seemed to count on my unwillingness to ask. The safety of silence? The illusion that unasked questions keep the peace. But peace, I now saw, is mold growing on the walls of complacency. On the night my mother's condition became critical, I wandered hospital hallways, chasing old memories of my brother, who once let me sleep with my head on his shoulder. Now he avoided even my gaze, not out of anger, but from a shame rooted deeper than words. Debt makes people bow their heads or turn their backs, and in that darkness, I counted the size of everyone I loved. After the funeral, among administrative papers and unpaid bills, I sat before my mother's portrait and swore I wouldn't turn away from the ugly shapes of the truth anymore. My determination was pared to the bone. I would uncover every document, reveal every secret, no matter how much it hurt. And in doing so, perhaps I would close the final act of this false play. The twist came quietly in an unremarkable envelope sent by a creditor. This time, everything was spelled out. The contract copies, both my husband's previous and current names, the careful listing of my brother as guarantor. Then, in a margin scribbled by hand, the true story appeared. My husband had convinced my brother to lend his name for a friend in need, swearing he'd repay every penny and keep me safely out of the disgrace. My brother agreed, wanting to shield me from the shame and preserve the thin layer of honor atop our family's battered pride. The price? Years of silent suffering, my own husband's unpaid debts stripping my brother to near ruin. The polished faces young Sue and I wore as a couple were nothing but shields, protecting him, exposing everyone else. That night, sleep was impossible. In the silence, I realized my brother and I both endured so much, not out of ignorance, but out of an exhausting desire to appear respectable, to protect the shreds of family name. The following day, I went to my brother's home, my heart heavier and clearer than it had ever been. Instead of apologies, I brought records, the proof in black and white of what had been hidden. In the hush that followed, we looked at each other in a light neither of us had seen for years. Siblings, once again, stripped of pretense. In that stillness, we found, if not absolution, at least a fragile truce born from understanding. Afterward, I faced my greatest decision. I began dismantling the glass walls I'd spent years maintaining. Step by step, I opened every box in my heart, separating what belonged to me from what I could no longer bear for others. I repeated the sentence to myself: I have endured enough. Now, I let go. Young Sue still sat at our table, crease-free shirt and polite posture, but none of it reassured me anymore. The performance was over. I divided the assets, cleared the legal trails left by his name and his debts, and for the first time, refused to shield anyone else from responsibility. That promise, made to myself, spread quietly through my family, finally, perhaps, breaking the cycle. Seasons turned. I scaled down the shop and found time each morning to stroll by the river. My reflection in the water looked clearer than it had in years. I finalized my divorce. My brother's home grew bright again. My sister called him more often. Life kept moving. Names change, faces crumble, but breath endures. The word debt will always be heavy, but the promise we made not to pass its burden to one another set me free in a way I never expected. Each day, as I walk, I hope the final scene of my life will not be spoiled by old mistakes I chose to ignore. So, let me ask you this. Are you polishing the windows of appearance so much that you've lost sight of the truth behind them? No matter how much we hope, changing a name can't change the debts we owe, nor the real responsibilities of our lives. Above all, I urge you, make a promise, for yourself and those you love, never to act as a guarantor for anyone, even family. Some promises must be made in honesty before it's too late.